If I'm squinting, it's because the sun's on my face, but you know what? We're not even going to talk about it because we're just not. But we are going to talk about my favorite books this year that I read. No shit. So we're going to start off with number 1, the first book I read of the year, Love Hypothesis. Ow. Oh my god. One of my favorite books ever. Deserved all the hype that it got, okay? And it's one of the only TikTok books that, like, the books that I like saw from TikTok and bought because of TikTok, that I genuinely loved. It was so good. It was so fun. It was so, like, the tropes that were in it were just perfectly executed, and I just really loved it. And I can't say the same for Ali Hazelwood's second book, following this women in STEM thing. I still love that one, and I think it was one of my favorite reads. I read it in a day because it was just one of those books where it was just like, it does remind you of Wattpad, but not because of the writing, but because of all the tropes in it. But it's a good thing. It's a good thing because I just thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a really beautiful, cute little romance, which at the time I really needed to read. But another one is The Storyteller by Dave Grohl? Yeah, that's right. It's his autobiography, and that was like the second book I read this year, I think. And it was so good. It was honestly one of my favorite, like, memoirs / autobiographies. The way he wrote, it was almost like I could hear his voice, and that's how you know it's like a good book and like written well. And I think that if you've been a fan of Nirvana, if you've been a fan of him, if you've been a fan of like that genre of music, then it's important to read, and you get to see his experience as a father, as someone who lost his best friend, and it's sad because obviously they further lost another very close friend and part of the Foo Fighters band this year or last year. This year, I think. And so, you know, no one really got to see that in this book, but he still talks about such important things, and I think it's just really a telltale sign of like what kind of person he is, and it's really lovely. I think it's really heartfelt, and you can tell like he's a genuine guy, and that's what I really liked about the book, and it was just so fun. I really loved reading it. And then this is a series that I enjoyed, is the Crave series by Tracy Wolff. The only fantasy books I read this year. I do want to read more, I do, but I'm really picky about my fantasies, because if there's too much world building, like I can't get into it. Like, it really depends. But Crave, oh my god. And it's embarrassing, okay, how I got into this series. Okay, I had, Episode. I had something like Episode, and it wasn't Episode, but it was something like that, and I can't remember its name, but it was like romance stories that you would like play out, and it's so embarrassing. But on there, Crave was one of the books that they took from and like made part of their game, and I played it and became obsessed with it. And then this year I finally got to read it, because that was like 2 years ago. I finally got to read it, and yeah, I love it. It's my favorite. I wouldn't even say it's like the best written series ever. I would just say that the world building is simple enough for someone like me, and you really are like connected to the characters in it. Like, you're really like attached to the characters. And over again I've said in these reviews that if you're not attached to a character, I can't personally read the rest of the book, or like I won't like the book even if I continue it, because I need to be attached. And the same thing goes for films, to be honest. But Crave series, I just love it so much, and I need to get the next book. I thought it was over, but it's not, which makes me really happy. And then, surprisingly, this book is on this list. I didn't think it would be, but it is. Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. You guys know I fucking hated Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo so much. I can't actually express how much I hated that fucking book. I hated it. It was awful. But Daisy Jones and the Six was brilliant. And I loved it. Which is why I won't allow Taylor Jenkins Reid slander. But I will allow Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo slander. But TJR wrote Daisy Jones. So I can't accept TJR slander. But I was sobbing by the end of the book. I was sobbing, like I was full blown in tears. And I think Daisy Jones, she wrote first. And I think like I could tell after reading Daisy Jones that like her aim with Seven Husbands was similar to Daisy Jones in terms of structure, but I think she executed Daisy Jones far better than Evelyn Hugo. And again, the premise of Evelyn Hugo is great, but I just really didn't like how it was executed at all, not just in the writing but in the plot. I think it was awful, but the way she did it with Daisy Jones was brilliant. Even the plot twist at the end was good, even though you kind of could see it coming in a small way. It's pretty much the exact same structure in a way to Seven Husbands, but it's just done in such a better way, and the story is beautiful. And yeah, loved it. Brilliant, really, really brilliant read, and I was crying by the end of it. Then I have One Day by David Nichols. Yeah, I sobbed. And the thing is like, I loved the film of this, and I watched the film first, and I don't usually like to watch films after reading the book or reading the book after I've watched the film. But this book was like recommended by this YouTuber, and I was like, oh my god, that looks like such a good book. I got it, and then like a chapter into it, I was like, wait, this is the fucking movie. And I unfortunately at the time resonated with both the movie and the fucking book, but so it kind of felt like the universe was screaming at me. I read it anyway, and I'm so glad I did, because I loved it, and it's still one of my favorite fucking books. And it's just so sad. It's so sad. And I think like this book and another book that I'm going to say at the end of this list, I related to them so much, which is why I loved them, I think, so much. And the writing was actually good, so it's like a bonus on top of that. But if I relate to something, I feel like I immediately kind of like it anyway, so you know what I mean. But yeah, I loved it, and it was so sad. Another series, but this is a romance series, and arguably I think these might be my favorite books of the year, which is kind of sad. But the Fine Print series, which is actually called like the Billionaire Brothers series, but I'm not calling it that. I'm calling it the Fine Print series. So the Fine Print, which is book 1, and Terms and Conditions, which is book 2, and book 3 I think is called Final Offer, and that's not out yet, but it's coming out in like January, and I'm gonna get it. It's gonna be like my first fucking book I'm buying of next year. Obsessed. I can't even express to you how brilliant this series is. It's well written. The tropes are perfect, executed perfectly. It's literally everything under the sun. It's diverse, which is needed in books in general. And it's also just like not like TikTok-y or like Wattpad-y. And it's also, the plot is so good. Like, it's different to most romances. You know, like, I read so many romances this year. It's like my top genre, which is fine, and I love it. But I read so many boring ones. Like, I liked some, like Spanish Love Deception and People We Meet on Vacation. They were okay reads. I enjoyed it. But the plots were so fucking bland, and they were like anything else. Whereas the Fine Print series is so different. It's set on a fucking like Disneyland, whatever they're called. I can't even, it's gonna bother me now, but it's like basically set in like Disneyland, just obviously you can't call it Disneyland. So yeah, you just get loads of like different perspectives. I love that it's dual perspective. That I love that so much. I've always loved dual perspective ever since I read Lux. Well, I audiobooked Lux 2 years ago. It's still one of my favorite cringy romances ever. The whole series is like 8 books, but it's so cringy, and I would never buy those books because the covers are horrendous. But dual perspective is always a win for me. I love seeing the male's perspective in romances. I think it's like what makes them more romantic. So yeah, this series, I don't have a single bad thing to say about it. Not a single bad thing. The cover's gorgeous, beautiful, compared to so fucking many boring ones, like the ones I mentioned. So I think it's my favourite books this year. I just love them so much. Surprisingly, this has made it onto the list. I didn't think it would prior to reading it, but it has. The Picture of Dorian Gray. If you know me, you know that I've slandered classic books for a long time now. And you can hate me all you want for that. But it was valid, considering Lord of the Flies sucked. But Picture of Dorian Gray was so good and so queer-coded. I finally understand all the memes, but it was so good. I loved it. I was obsessed with the characters. I was in the story. The writing was beautiful, and like the cover also, the Waterstones cover I got, gorgeous, stunning. I just overall loved it. I was so obsessed with it, and I understand the hype about it. It deserves every bit of it, to be honest. This is the book that I was talking about, which also made me cry. Love in Other Words. I think after The Fine Print, this like romance book was like my favorite. I think after that series, it was just, first of all, again, I related to it, which I fucking hated, but because I related to it, I loved it. And I think that it was beautiful. Also, the man was Greek, so I was like, me and him, same vibe. And it was just like a beautiful representation of like first love and like real love, like true genuine love, and grief and the nuances that go into relationships. And I definitely think it could have taken a deeper route in a way with like grief and things like that. But saying that, I think it was a perfect light-hearted romance that still had a sense of depth to it and wasn't cringy, which is what I look for nowadays because we're overtaken by fucking TikTok and shit like that. So, you know, but I loved it, and it was just brilliant and so sad and beautiful and perfect all at once. Then we have another classic which I actually liked, which was Catcher in the Rye. Again, I understand the entire hype about this fucking book. I always relate this to Lady Bird, because Lady Bird is a film about nothing, and Catcher in the Rye is a book about nothing. Nothing happens, but it is simply about existing as a human, and I think that's so beautiful and an underrated thing in media, but also very hard to achieve as a writer or creator or filmmaker or whatever. And I just really actually got attached to the character, and on paper I don't think that you would necessarily think that you'd get attached to that character, but you do, the same way that you would with Lady Bird in Lady Bird. So I really loved that, and I think it was beautifully written and really just a really good read. Finally, I'm ending on one that I feel captures me. I feel it's very Mia coded, which isn't really a good thing considering what the book's about. But it's called The Piano Teacher. I've forgotten who it's by, but it's called The Piano Teacher. And I think it's even a movie. I haven't watched it yet, though. It's basically about a young woman who has a strange relationship with her mother, and they live together, and she is... Actually, no, she's not young. She's like in her 40s, I think. 30s, 40s. And it's about her stunted experience and growth, especially with romantic connections and sex, and how she goes about when she is in love with someone and how that affects her mother. It's so like, I love books and movies that capture nuance, because that's all that life is. Nuance is in every situation. Nothing is black and white. We may want it to be, but it's never black and white. Not in real life mass experiences such as love and heartbreak, even things like cheating, which is only one I can think of, and obviously things like murder and things like that are black and white in most cases, right? But things like, you know, things that most people experience or some people experience, not just rare cases. They are so nuanced and we don't want to talk about that. And social media has this whole thing of shutting it down and making everything black and white. And if you prioritize love, you don't care about yourself apparently these days, and things like that. And it's toxic and I hate it. And so I think like when books like this show like the nuance in love between a mother and a daughter, and the nuance in a sexual relationship with yourself, and the nuance in feminine sexuality, and the nuance in loving relationships, and the nuance in expectations of men and women, just all of that, I just think it was a beautiful way of portraying all of that. And it was so, in a way, twisted and disturbed, but not in a harmful way, I think it was, or a toxic way. I just think it was a realistic portrayal of an experience out there that a lot of people are going to have and we won't even know about it. But it's, again, almost like Catcher in the Rye. Nothing happens, but so much happens. It's just about the human experience of being a human, and that's my favorite thing. I think that's why it's so Mia coded, and I just absolutely love it, and it was brilliant, and I think you need to read it. So those were my favorite books of this year, and I have read 61 books and counting. So little Mia, I say little Mia, like last year I was 5. Mia last year would be very pleased with how many books she's read. And I'm going to read more next year. You mark my words. I don't care if I'm spending my whole bank account money on it. It's happening. Anyway, thank you for watching. I love you guys very much. I hope you enjoyed this. If you read any of these, let me know. What were your favorite books of the year? Have you read as many as you wanted to? Much, and I will see you in my next video. Mwah.